Okay, let's unpack this. You know how sometimes you hear about a really high-profile case, but it's only when you dig into the actual evidence presented in court that you find the truly surprising details.
Absolutely, yeah. The public story is one thing, but the specific pieces of information a jury actually has to weigh to reach a verdict. That's often where the unexpected stuff comes out.
Exactly. And today we're taking a deep dive into the source material around one of those cases. The trial where former NFL player Aaron Hernandez was found guilty of the murder of Odin Lloyd.
Right. We're working from an article here that really breaks down the verdict and the key aspects of that trial. So our mission essentially is to walk you through the crucial details from this source.
Get a handle on the case presented by both sides.
Yeah, the prosecution and the defense, and really highlight the specific evidence that seemed most impactful in, leading to that final verdict.
It was a huge trial, massive attention, stretched out over 4 months, and the end result, a mandatory sentence of life without parole.
And our source gets right to that core outcome. Aaron Hernandez was found guilty on a Wednesday of first-degree murder. This was for the shooting death of Odin Lloyd back on June 17th, 2013.
Then that conviction, the article points out, it carries that mandatory sentence. Life in prison, no chance of parole. That's Massachusetts law. They don't have capital punishment for state cases.
Right, and it wasn't just the murder charge. He was also convicted on several other firearm counts that were presented alongside it.
Okay, like what?
Well, carrying a firearm without a license, 2 counts of carrying a large capacity firearm, possession of ammunition without an FID card.
An FID card.
Right.
Right, that's the firearm identification card you need in Massachusetts for guns and ammo.
Exactly. And also possession of a firearm without that FID card. So multiple weapons charges on top of the murder conviction.
And that verdict came after, what, 6 days of deliberation, about 35 hours?
Yeah, 35 hours over 6 days. And that followed a trial where the prosecution really laid out their case, calling 131 witnesses over 9 weeks of testimony. It was extensive.
So let's set the scene a bit. Who was Odin Lloyd?
Odin Lloyd, he was 27 years old, a former semi-pro football player.
Yeah.
And his connection to Hernandez was that he was dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée at the time.
Okay. And the crime itself, June 17th, 2013, his body was found where?
In an industrial park up in Massachusetts. And crucially, less than a mile from Hernandez's own home. The article notes he'd been shot 6 times.
6 times. Okay, so how did the prosecution frame this? What was their story?
Their theory, according to the source, was pretty direct. Hernandez and 2 friends, Ernest Wallace or Carlos Ortiz, drove Lloyd to that park after they'd all been out the night before.
Okay.
And that Hernandez was the one who actually pulled the trigger. They argued he was a trigger man.
And they brought in, what, 131 witnesses to back that up?
Yeah, a huge number. Clearly trying to build this comprehensive picture timeline, opportunity, the connections between everyone involved.
So what about the defense? How did they respond? Their lead attorney was James Sultan.
Right. And their approach was quite different. Interestingly, they actually admitted Hernandez was at the scene when Lloyd was killed.
Oh, really? So they didn't dispute his presence?
No. But their argument was that one or both of the other guys, Wallace or Ortiz, were the actual shooters. They painted Hernandez as, like, a witness to the event, not the person who did it.
And their case was much shorter.
Very brief in comparison. Just 3 witnesses, all called in a single day.
And they had some headwinds from the start, didn't they? Like asking the jury to ignore all the media hype.
Absolutely. They urged the jurors to try and block out the intense media coverage surrounding Hernandez. And they hammered on the idea that the prosecution's case had, quote, gaping holes.
Okay, so that brings us to the evidence itself. The source describes it as a largely circumstantial case. Let's dig into some of those specifics the prosecution used.
Yeah, let's do that. It's really about how they pieced it all together.
So placing Hernandez near the scene, linking him to the timing, what stood out there?
Well, a really key piece was surveillance video from inside Hernandez's own home. This footage, taken just 10 minutes after the estimated time Lloyd was killed.
10 minutes, that's tight.
Very tight. And it showed Hernandez holding what looked like a Glock pistol. Now, it wasn't confirmed as the murder weapon, but it was the same kind of weapon used in the shooting.
So putting him close, right after the estimated time of death, holding a similar type of weapon, what about more direct physical evidence?
Okay, this is where the forensics come in, and it gets pretty compelling. They found bullets inside a rental car that Hernandez had been using.
Right?
And those bullets, ballistically matched bullets, recovered from the crime scene itself. That's a direct link, his rental car, to the murder site via the bullets.
Wow. And then there's this detail the source highlights, which is just wild. The chewing gum.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The blue chewing gum. found stuck to a shell casing inside that same rental car.
Okay, wait. Gum on a shell casing.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. They found Hernandez's DNA on that shell casing and the gum.
His DNA on the casing with the gum.
Yes. And to tie it up even tighter, they had testimony from a gas station employee who said Hernandez bought blue gum, that specific kind, the night of the murder.
So you've got the bullets linking the car to the scene, and then inside the car, a shell casing linked directly to Hernandez through his DNA and this very specific personal habit, the blue gum he just bought. That's quite a chain.
It's a powerful chain of circumstantial evidence, absolutely. It's
Yep.
hard to explain away a detail like that.
Definitely. Okay, so beyond the physical stuff, there was testimony about Hernandez's actions after the crime, things suggesting maybe he knew he was guilty.
Exactly, what lawyers call consciousness of guilt. The article mentions his housekeeper testified. She said she saw Hernandez toying with a home surveillance camera the day after the murder.
Toying with it.
Yeah, and apparently he stopped immediately, abruptly, when he realized she was watching him.
And then there was the testimony from his fiancée, Shiana Jenkins. That got a lot of coverage.
It did. She testified that Hernandez specifically asked her to remove a box from their basement. Prosecutors argued pretty strongly that this box contained the murder weapon.
And did she?
She did remove it. There was surveillance video showing her leaving the house carrying a box covered with a trash bag or clothing, I believe. She claimed she drove around, found a random dumpster, and threw it away without ever looking inside.
Right. Which obviously the prosecution argued was Hernandez getting her to dispose of the missing murder weapon.
Precisely. The jury could infer that's what happened.
Were there other, maybe smaller behavioral details presented?
Yeah, a few things. Like marijuana joint was found near Lloyd's body, and there was testimony about Hernandez being a heavy marijuana user. Maybe less direct, but part of the overall picture.
Okay.
And also remember the rental car. The manager testified that when Hernandez returned it, it was damaged. And maybe significantly, when she pointed out the damage, Hernandez offered her some blue gum.
He offered her the blue gum. Wow, that detail again.
Exactly. So these things individually maybe seem small, but together, they paint a picture of his state, his actions, and echo that unique gum detail.
The source also mentions another gun, right? Not the murder weapon, but found nearby.
Yes, a .22 caliber pistol,
Oh.
totally distinct from the murder weapon, which was believed to be a .45 caliber Glock. But police tied this .22 to Hernandez.
Okay.
And the prosecution argued he probably ditched it while he was under investigation, maybe in panic, even though it wasn't the gun used to kill Lloyd. Another sign of trying to get rid of potentially incriminating items.
And finally, the footprints. What was the deal with those?
Police claim they found footprints near Lloyd's body that matched Hernandez's specific sneakers, size 13 Nike Air Jordan Retro Lows.
Seems pretty specific.
It does, but this is where the defense pushed back effectively. They challenged the sort of science or certainty of footprint analysis.
Oh, so?
They brought in a consultant from Nike who testified that, yes, Hernandez wore those shoes, but literally millions of other Nike shoes make the same impression. So it created doubt about whether that footprint definitively placed him there over anyone else wearing similar Nikes.
Right, planting that seed of reasonable doubt about that specific piece.
Exactly.
So, okay, they assembled all these pieces, quite a few threads there, but the article does point out some big challenges the prosecution faced. Stuff people might expect in a murder trial that just wasn't there.
Absolutely. Huge hurdles. Number one, the murder weapon, that Glock, was never recovered. Gone.
Never found, okay.
Number two, no eyewitness. Nobody saw the actual shooting happen.
Right.
And number three, the prosecution didn't really present a clear, solid motive for why Hernandez would kill Odin Lloyd. They sort of hinted at maybe Lloyd knowing too much about Hernandez's life, but it wasn't a firmly established motive.
Those are major gaps. No gun, no witness, no clear why. So the jury really had to rely on connecting those circumstantial dots we've been talking about.
Entirely. And it's also important, the source notes, that the other two men implicated, Wallace and Ortiz, they did not testify in this trial. Their side of the story wasn't heard by this jury.
What about the testimony from Robert Kraft, the Patriots owner?
Yeah, that was interesting. Kraft testified that days after Lloyd's death hit the news, Hernandez told him directly, face-to-face, that he was not involved, and insisted he'd been at a nightclub when it happened.
But that wasn't true.
Well, the article highlights that other witness testimony and crucially surveillance footage directly contradicted Hernandez's alibi about being at a club.
So telling his boss one thing while evidence showed another.
Right. which the jury could easily interpret as an attempt by Hernandez to lie, to mislead, to cover up his actual whereabouts and involvement.
Now, if we zoom out for a second,
Yeah.
it's important to remember this trial was only about Odin Lloyd's murder, right?
Mm.
The source mentions Hernandez had other serious legal issues looming.
Yes, absolutely critical context.
Yeah.
He was facing an upcoming double murder trial for the killings of Safiro Furtado and Daniel Breaux in Boston back in 2012. And he'd also been linked to an unsolved shooting down in Florida years earlier, 2007.
But the jury in this case, the Lloyd case, they weren't allowed to hear about any of that.
Strictly forbidden. The judge made sure that evidence related to those other alleged crimes was kept out of this trial. It just underscores how our legal system compartmentalizes. Each case has to stand on its own evidence.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then, the outcome. Aaron Hernandez convicted of first-degree murder, and it was built really significantly on this complex web, this assembly of circumstantial evidence gathered over months.
Yeah, and I think what this case really shows you, as detailed in our source material, is how a conviction can happen even without that so-called smoking gun. No eyewitness to the killing itself, no murder weapon found.
Yep.
It really came down to the prosecution's ability to weave together all those different threads. The forensic links, like the bullets and the gum DNA, the surveillance footage, the behavioral stuff like tampering with the camera or the fiancé removing the box, putting it all together into a narrative that convinced the jury.
It really makes you think about how different types of evidence play out in court, how they're presented, how the defense tries to poke holes in them, like with the footprint evidence, and how the collective weight of it all, even if no single piece is absolute proof on its own, can become, well, incredibly powerful in the jury room.
And it leaves you with a pretty interesting question to chew on, doesn't it? What does it actually mean for a case to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Especially when the evidence is mostly circumstantial like this. How is that legal standard different from just, feeling personally sure based on everything you've heard?
That line between being personally convinced and meeting that high legal bar of proof.
Yeah, that's really the tightrope the jury has to walk. It's at the absolute heart of their decision.